Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
I used to really berate myself that I didn't have a thick skin. And I can remember saying that story quite a lot out loud, that I love television, probably the same as athletics of what I said, but possibly my makeup wasn't best placed to sit in the industry that I'd chosen. And actually, I learned to stop wishing that I was made up of other stuff. Yes, I have a sensitivity. Reframing that and thinking about my thickness of skin or perceived lack of it, I started to recognize the real well of inner strength I had through personal trauma. And I didn't realize I had that. It surprised me when it came about, and I'm able to then use that in subsequent big and professional pressures.
Today, I'm talking to Abi Stephens, a renowned TV sports presenter who's been trackside, pitchside and ringside the world over, hosting major sporting tournaments including the Olympics and World Cups for the likes of ITV, BT Sport and Discovery. Off-screen, she's a leadership performance coach, drawing on her rich experience performing live under pressure to help leaders in sport and business elevate their impact and influence, particularly under the spotlight. Whether interviewing high-profile athletes or coaching business executives, Abi manages to draw out their most compelling stories so that they and the world learn and benefit from their experience. An athlete herself, Abi's completed 6 marathons, including the prestigious Boston Marathon. In this conversation, Abi shares how she's learnt to be present in pressure and to let go, when she decided to stop listening to the voice that said she needed thicker skin, and how she found a source of professional strength through personal trauma. Abi, thank you so much for joining me on Better Under Pressure. I'm very excited about talking to you.
Me too. I'm excited about being here.
Good. Well, shall we start with, just tell me about when do you remember experiencing pressure? For the first time, maybe.
Yeah. I was thinking about this just before I came onto the call, and I'm passionate about words and the meanings they create and the emotions that go with them. And when I was thinking about pressure, I immediately link it to performance, which is a massive part of my life and has been and still is. And I went back to a performance as a very young girl doing a gymnastics routine, because that is possibly my earliest memory of performing in front of an audience. Okay. And having those corresponding feelings of wanting to perform well and the adrenaline and the excitement / nerves that comes with that. But then I was thinking a bit closer about that experience, and I thought, you know what, I don't know if I really experienced pressure, because pressure for me, it has a negative bias. It has a connotation that it makes me think of more of a negative impact. And I think actually at that time, I didn't feel pressurized. It was just a sense of performing. And I think the distinguishing feeling for me was when performance did have more of those negative associations, where I did feel like the pressure was too much. And it was still at school, but it was definitely a little bit later. Okay. And it's actually in sport, and sport is still a massive part of my life. And it was athletics. And I've always loved athletics, and I absolutely did at the time. But I can remember also dreading it. So the night before a big athletics meeting, my sleep was impacted. On the day of an athletics competition, I found it really difficult to eat. I found it difficult to speak to anyone. I would take myself off for hours before and do some really stretched out, crazy warm-up routine, which at the time I think I know, but even more now in hindsight, that was absolutely to counter some of the pressure that I was feeling. But it was so much that I was putting on myself. And athletics predominantly, it's an individual sport. I think that desire to achieve and win as an individual was so great that I sort of loved it and hated it. And I ran the 200 meters and I was good. And so it'd be over quite quickly and I'd often win. So then there was this feeling of triumph and all the great positive hormones and emotions that you feel. So it'd be this circle. Yes. But I definitely was on this, I walked a fine line between loving it and dreading it. But it was those more negative associations. It's way before I knew the workings of the mind and how psychology plays itself out in performance, but it was a sense that it could easily become too much.
Okay. And were you, as you were an athlete, and I know sport sits at the heart of everything that you do, Abi, but was that something that you were trained for, or is that something that you experienced and felt and thought, okay, this is something I've got to manage as I go through more competitions, as I go through more sort of performance pressure?
Yeah, I think that I try to find my own ways of dealing with it. And I don't think I was equipped with people to help work out what was going on in the mind in that stage. I was surrounded by some brilliant coaches that absolutely enabled me to get the best time I could in those competitions. But managing the psychology around it, I felt less supported. And as those competitions got bigger, or those performances got bigger in sport and on stage and in television as I went on to, I still don't think that I was set up. As those TV shows got bigger, the pressure was bigger, and you're working with brilliant producers and directors to make the show and the product and the editorial so great. But I don't think you're naturally set up to handle those pressure moments, how they may be playing out for you, how they can support you, or how you can feel connected to the team. Because when I was thinking about pressure, I think there's a real strong link to when I've put so much on me as an individual. So the work that I went on to do, because I knew that I needed some help in doing this, because this was things that I'd chosen. I'd chosen to compete in athletics.
Yes.
I'd chosen to follow a career in television. So lots of those choices involved performing under pressure.
Yeah.
So I knew that I needed some help if this is what I wanted to do. And this is what I love to do, really. Yes. And there was moments of really loving it, but because pressure became so great at certain instances, I did feel like it was getting in the way. So I sought out ways to manage it. And that was profound, because it's had a direct impact on what I've also gone on to do, which is to train as a coach and now help others. But that was because I needed the help of a coach. I thought, if this isn't immediately around me, yet I know I'm coming off big, what are essentially dream jobs, and then feeling depleted, exhausted, nothing else to give, knowing that I had put so much upon myself to perform, that it didn't feel healthy, that I needed someone to help me find how to make pressure a healthy thing so that I could do what I love to do.
Amazing. So tell us more about that. So how did you go on that journey of turning pressure into a healthy pressure rather than a depleting pressure?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing was the awareness. I think the first thing was going, it shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't be having this TV job coming up that is such an opportunity that I've started to dread it weeks in advance. So I'm already preparing for it from a place of dread. And then getting there and wanting, it just felt like a wrestle between what was my deep soulful intent, but what was my reality. So I think there was awareness that this really needed to change, and I had to take ownership of it so that I could enjoy it much more.
Yeah.
And once I reached out, I actually felt much more relieved, because I thought, oh gosh, this, and because then you've got something to do with it, rather than thinking this doesn't feel right, but I don't quite know why it feels right, other than there is this huge sense of overwhelm is what I link pressure to. Okay. And especially in television, where there's lots of people speaking into your ear, rather than going, brilliant, 10 minutes before we go live, here we are, I'm ready to thrive. I was just trying to get through it. I was just trying to survive. And I wanted to be much more present in those situations. And I felt that I was sometimes drowning in the pressure that I was putting on myself, you know, especially as a female in a particularly male dominated environment. So the sports I tend to do, motorsport, boxing and rugby. And I would try, it just felt a sense of trying and force, and I needed to do and research and prep and so much and impress so much. And you know, if I look at it now, I'm like, no wonder that I was just trying to cope a little. And the beauty of when I found some support, so the biggest differentiator was then when I could become the I in the role that I was there to do, and the purpose that had, which was such a privilege, such an opportunity to bring people that were watching at home to that live event, whether it's a Rugby World Cup final or a Formula One Grand Prix event, and connect them to the sport they love and the heroes much more. When I thought about that purpose, it actually removed all the pressure from me, because I was like, it wasn't about me. I was there in service to something else. So when I was able to make that switch, but also that I had practices that anchored me to that purpose and to then being present, because sport is unpredictable. And if you are more relaxed and calmer, especially if people are speaking in your ear, you can run with it much more. You can dance with what's going on, rather than holding on to it so tightly that you're not giving it space to breathe. The product and myself, in all honesty.
Yes.
And when I was able to make that change, then prep became a different experience. It was the right amount of prep, and it was looking forward to it, and it was doing the things that, you know, especially as a coach, those sort of uncomfortable things, but you know that are going to produce a better performance under pressure. So let's rehearse it, let's film it, let's review it, let's grow, let's make it better. All of those great things that enable you to own your performance. But when you're so under pressure, those things that you know can really help just feel another part of the pressure outside of you. So I think that was a change. I just brought it in, and once I brought it in, I could then let it go much more.
Yeah, and I really love that phrase, to be present in pressure. I think that's a really nice way of looking at sort of getting inside pressure as opposed to pressure happening to you. You can be present with it and manage it and feel it, and as you say, dance with it. I really like that idea, and I think I'm really intrigued as to how you recognized it, as you turned it basically from dread, I'm hearing, to a purpose that's beyond self. Actually, you know, I'm here in service to bringing great sport into people's households, you know, and if I stay present with that, I can do that. But wrapped around that is a big discipline that you developed, it sounds like, as well.
Absolutely. And that's totally right. Just having that positive reframe allowed me to connect to what I think in my soul I knew that I could do, which is why I chose television, which was the enabling part, the extracting and the eliciting of really human stories from athletes, compelling stories that move them in order to move others, their audience, and then in order to move the world. And therefore I felt like a conduit to that. And that therefore was incredibly liberating, because I had to be present in order to do that work with the most impact, because I had to be there and listen. Whereas when I was trying to do so much, the adrenaline was so over-consuming, you know, consumed me. Like you say, it was coming from the outside in, and that sense of trying to impress, or the perfectionism in it, meant that it was just it just became, the product just became smaller. The whole essence of it just felt like it was strangled slightly. And I didn't feel like I was owning my voice or my true power, which was really about others. I was making it about me, which is what I didn't want to do. But it was a way of trying to control the pressure. I was over controlling so that I could do something with it. But actually just recognizing it and reshaping it and digging into it to see what other positive reframe I could take with it, and then developing the discipline so that became the trigger to be the enabler and to let go with it all. Then that became the difference, really.
And how did you, so this journey of going from dread to being present with it,
yeah,
you know, what's the discipline for that? If you had to talk us through the discipline, Abi, like when do you feel that pressure is becoming unhelpful? What's the first sign where you feel, okay, I need to apply something here because it's taking over me as opposed to me being better within it?
Yeah, I think there's two things. There's one, even from just what we're speaking, where I try and do too much myself. And even from that athletics memory, once I was able to connect to the sense of team, or when I was able to think about, you know, doing the relay and the teammates, or how different I was in those experiences, how could I borrow from that, or the coaches around me, and as I grew with this, the same in the television, how could I connect to the pundits, which are often world champions, rather than trying to meet them on a level of knowledge. They're the world champion. I don't need to be. I just need to hear their stories so that they've got an insight to what these guys are now doing on the track. When I was able to make it about us, I suppose, or a collective, or a we, and not such an I, then that removed some of that pressure, so that it becomes something that we were in service to, a common goal. And that enabled me to have much braver conversations with those sometimes very, very high profile athletes who, you know, have an aura and have had an experience of being treated on a pedestal, but that enabled me to meet them on a balance and a PowerPoint which was much truer. That I wasn't trying to meet them on what they'd achieved, because that was ridiculous. I didn't have 80 caps playing for my country, or the experience of winning a world championship riding a bike at 220 miles per hour. But I was there going, how can we make this sport and this particular event the most entertaining and engaging one, so that we give all to the fans and we bring in more fans and they come back for more. Then it meant that I could ask some pertinent questions from them, but it also meant I could relax and go, okay, we're in this together. So I think the distinction between when it's become too much is when I lose that sense that I'm part of a belonging, a part of something else, and there's other people to help me. I don't need to do all of this on my own. Of when the force comes into it, when they're trying too hard. The other feeling that I get is a strong physical sensation. So I go back to that athletics and know that sleep and all those things, the physical energy, the emotional energy, the social energy, not being able to speak to friends, knowing all of those things were impacted. So if I can get a sense of that early on, if I know that my mind is racing too much and I can't do those practices that I've absolutely brought into my life to help with this balance, yoga or meditation, even though those are the times where those nurturing practices are most useful, if I can't do them, or feel that there's a barrier because there's something that's going on in my mind that's rushing and trying to over control, there's usually a sensation there to go, hold on, pause. And I think the practice, and no doubt obviously being coached and then going through the coaching qualification and then consequently helping others with this, is that it doesn't get to that point now where it's gone too far. There's early signs where I can hijack it. Whereas before, I think it was taking hold so much. So then the recovery, there was such a hangover to it. And then the next performance was coming up. Whereas now I get a sensation of it. I can feel it in my body and it's a sign, and I have a choice then. Of course, there are times where I ignore it and plow through and have another lesson, to pause and don't do it that way again. Let's try something new. But more often than not, I'm able to recognize those things and do something. And usually it's just a counter of the pressure I'm putting myself under. So, you know, I've talked about those different energies, but go for a run, or what's going to be my go-to physical enhancer, or make sure that I'm with my people that know that I have that achieving yang-like personality that can help offset it and balance, but also those people in the production where or people on screen as well, where we're doing this together and I don't have to do too much on my own.
Yes. So if you went to a moment where you feel pressure, maybe within the performance, Abi, or go to a moment, give us an example of when, I mean, I hear now that you're much more able to manage and recognize, and this is the wonderful growth journey, isn't it, with pressure, that you learn as you go, and you can manage it better, hopefully, as you go, and maybe put yourself in more pressure situations because you can respond differently. But if you were to go to wherever you are now, give us an example of a pressure situation in your working environment now, and talk us through what you do in that moment of pressure that gets you back in control and back feeling, good and present with it.
It happens most Monday nights around about 7:20. So 7:30, I do a live motorsport show on Discovery, on Eurosport Discovery. And there's something about this particular motorsport where it's so fast. On paper, it should be really quite simple, but so much goes on in this 2.5 hours that about 15 minutes or maybe earlier, about half an hour before, they rev up the bikes, and it is this crazy sound and this smell of methanol, and my heart starts to absolutely race.
Oh, sure.
And I suppose this is the shift between dread, because this is my second year doing this series, and there was, even with all the learning and practices that I've done around it, a sense of dread that I'd feel then as well. But actually it's you're so alive that rather than trying to go, okay, don't feel nervous, don't, you've got this, don't you should be in control. I think now I'm like, let the nerves come, because they're about to go and compete. In my own sense of it, I'm now going out to perform. I'm not going out and riding a bike with no brakes as they do, but I've got my own version of it. So actually let these emotions come, because this is really exciting, and I'm lucky enough to experience this, and is part of the pressure that I enjoy and I thrive on. And I have sought out pressure since a young child, that always looked for those moments to perform. So this is embracing it. And then about 15 minutes, I go through a ritual. So I would have still done research, smart research, and not too much of it, but I'll go through just my top lines, just through the running order of the script, and just get my idea of where I'm going in those first few stages. But then in those, and this is when I use the timing in my ear then to really help me, because it's guiding me. So rather than dreading it, okay, 5 minutes till we go live, Abi, 5 minutes till we go live, I'm like, okay, here we go. That's my trigger now to do my ritual. And my ritual is, and I know I've also shared this with you when you were writing your book, The Shed Method, but it starts with me creating a physical presence, because you can't see on our Zoom screen, but I'm tiny. I'm 5'1" on a good day. So I'm always in heels, regardless if I'm on a motorsport track. But I have this image of sticky leaves on the bottom, or the soles of my shoes, and it just gives me roots. It just gives me this grounding and sense that I belong there. I take some real deep breaths to calm me down, because after I've been listening to the bikes and getting really excited, I just want to bring it in and let that breath just regulate my emotional state. I then absolutely dial up what I'm saying to myself, and I'm my biggest cheerleader in those moments. It's really, I am willing myself on to win, as those guys are that are about to go on the track, which is incredible, really, because I've seen this in sport all the time. They'd be saying it to themselves, big mantras, self-talk, and this is my version of it. And then I would have practiced that opening link multiple times out loud, and I'd probably practice it another time just before, in those few minutes before, just so my lips and my tongue is got around those words. My brain knows exactly what it's about to do. And then the direction that I give it, the cue is low and slow. Low and slow, because when I'm excited, those moments before, the voice gets high, the energy is quite high in my body. And I just want to, lower and ground it, and low and slow opening link, low and slow opening link. And it calms me even as I say it.
Oh, I can hear it.
It gives it somewhere to go. It just channels the energy. And it means that I'm setting the tone right from the off. Whereas before, when I was dreading it, I would find my confidence about a quarter of the way into the program.
Yeah.
And this was bringing it forward to those moments before. And then when the red light was on, that opening link would happen. And I just felt that I was thriving in what is ultimately a high pressure moment.
I love that, Abi. There's so many beautiful reframes in that description, from dread to thrive. You know, the way that you're talking about it, the state, I mean, people listening to it will hear it in the voice, but people watching it and listening to it will see it as well. It's like a literal state change as you go through that. And this is what I love about this stuff, is that I think when we really start to own our responses in pressure moments, we can hijack it, we can boss it.
Yeah.
We can absolutely be who we want to be in it, and better because of it.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, a lot of the conversations that I've been having over the last few months through this podcast, that people are under so much, a variety of pressures depending on where they are. But what is really consistent across all conversations is this sort of pressure of noise and constant doing that is infecting all of our lives right now. That means that I think we really have to get present with the pressure and make some choices about how we want to be with it.
Yeah.
And what you've just described there is a fantastic illustration of this has been well honed over a few years of a ritual that gets me into my best shape for a pressure that I used to dread, and now I thrive in it. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Abi has mentioned so many useful points that I feel the need to pause and gather some of them. I want to focus on 3 things she said. Firstly, I realised I was dreading something that I'd worked so hard to achieve, and I was drowning in the pressure I was putting on myself. How human is that? The success of achieving something that we wanted suddenly morphs into a pressure of, can I actually do it? It reminds me of all the quotes and the poems that exist around this human tendency. Be careful what you wish for. And Marianne Williamson's poem, Who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented and fabulous? To name but 2. But what Abi is reminding us about here is that we all have the ability to reframe the story we tell ourselves about the pressure of doing something we feel is out of our comfort zone. We can either feel that dread and walk away, or choose, like her, to reframe, I'm dreading this, into, I'm excited and privileged to have this opportunity. Secondly, Abi says, I found my confidence a quarter of the way into the programme. This resonates on so many levels. Clients who have key presentations, conversations or interviews who get so frustrated with themselves because they flounder at the start or overspeak or go too fast. This certainly rings true for me. Even on this podcast, particularly when I first started, the pressure or excitement of finally getting a podcast off the ground that I wanted to do for a long time meant that I started episodes, especially the early ones, saying, hello and welcome to this podcast, Better Under Pressure, which I clearly wasn't. I love Abi's focus on going over the opening lines over and over again so she could be more relaxed and calmer from the start, to enable her to, as she says, dance with what's going on rather than holding on to it so tightly and over-controlling. Instead of hearing the 5-minute countdown in her ears as dread, chose instead to say, okay, this is my trigger to do my ritual, which takes me to my 3rd and final point. Abi told us, I have practices that anchor me, things I know are going to enable me to be better under pressure. Having ways to own your performance under pressure so you can bring the best of yourself to those moments is key. A common request I get from clients is how to manage my emotions to be better in pressure moments. Abi shares 4 things she does to remain present in the immediacy of pressure and that help her to own her performance. She owns her body. And for her, it's about imagining sticky leaves on the base of her shoes to keep her grounded and give her roots and a sense of belonging. She breathes. She takes long, deep breaths to calm down and to let the slow exhalation regulate her emotional state. She dials up what she says to herself. She becomes her biggest cheerleader to give her confidence and to connect her to Abi at her best. And finally, she runs the mantra low and slow to help her deliver her well-rehearsed, first opening line in the way she wants. This is Abi's ritual for her to control what she can in an unpredictable environment. We all have moments where we want to perform at our best, and having a pressure ritual that can set us up to own our performance can make a big difference. The key is to work it out and rehearse it outside of the pressure moment so it can kick in, as it clearly does for Abi, when she needs it most.
The crazy thing was that I was dreading something that I'd worked so hard to do and achieve.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've just got a dream job, but I'm dreading that dream job. That makes no sense. And that's why I had to take some ownership of it, so that I could then, you say, as you mentioned, hearing the thrive, so that I could really live what I'd spent years and years wanting to do. And then it was, you could just hear so much more, because you quietened it down so that you are able to listen on a different level. And it allowed me as a sports broadcaster to do a lot less and do more as a result. When I got to that stage where I felt confident enough to ask someone that has just won an incredible high pressure moment, so what happened? Or tell me more. I was like, I'm there, because the pressure on that overdoing was I would say these long-winded questions where I'd answered the question and I'd proved my worth and I'd proved how much I knew the sport, and I'd given this, this athlete who's maybe spent 4 years competing for this, you're practicing and training for this moment, nothing to add. The director was like, stop speaking. And I was like, no, I don't want to be speaking anymore. And I'm still speaking. Oh goodness, I'm still speaking. And I think this just allowed me to just take it all in. Whereas I think those high pressure moments before, a lot of the time I'd have a slight out of body experience with it, where I didn't really remember what I was saying in the moment. And then, that can be a hazard in my job. If I'm interviewing someone and I'm thinking so much about the research I've done and the question I'm going to ask next, they've already given it to me. It's not that true conversation where I'm really going, what is the story and what are the nuggets here and how can I bring them out more? And, and if they've gone through 12 rounds of a boxing match and come out unbeaten, but how can I still extract something that's going to make them feel proud, that's going to make their family feel proud, and as a result create more fans that they then come back and watch how this guy competes in his next fight, then that became much more fulfilling.
Yes, I'm sure. And also, it's a real essence of listening, isn't it, that you're talking about there? And I think, I know we're talking about a very specific example around TV and interviewing, celebrity sportsmen and women. But I think there's some real resonance here, Abi, for all of us, maybe in meetings or, working with people that are, feel more or superior than you, or have got more knowledge than you, or that sits around us as colleagues, that we can so easily go into that over speaking or over proof, as opposed to just listening in the we.
Yeah, totally. And then it don't have to be something different. I think this is where the impact of being coached, and even our work together, Sarah, and then thinking this has had such a profound impact on the work that I'm doing in a television capacity, but also in my life.
Yes.
That I want to help others with this. And obviously then my expertise in this sort of impact and influence space, and it makes sense to do it in that world of performance and the pressure that comes with that. But when that almost gave people permission that they didn't have to be a certain voice in those meetings. That they didn't have to be the one that stole the limelight, but they could have add just as much value and have just as much presence and influence. But by listening to what that we needed and what they could therefore add to create that, I think was just, for the work that I've done with various people, can impact you way beyond that boardroom.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't, honestly, Sarah, it doesn't seem to matter who I work with in that performance coaching space, whether they are Premier League footballers, whether they are C-suite execs, there seems to be a confident beat in that high pressure moment to own your voice that is getting in the way. And actually therefore to take ownership of it in how they are looking after themselves pre, in the moment and post, so that they can be authentically them and put their voice out into that boardroom and out into the world. Then it's there just feels some wonderful work around that, but then it's even more important that I live it.
Absolutely. And also it's contagious, isn't it? Because if you're modeling that, then you're pulling that out of the other people as well, which is wonderful. Great. So Abi, I know that that's the pressure in your working life. I also know that there's been tremendous pressure in your personal life. And I wondered if you'd be happy to talk a little bit about how has any of this helped you with personal pressure that you have been managing? Because it's sort of come across in many conversations that we're not just working with pressure in one sphere of our life, it's everywhere. And often, you know, we're carrying stuff that we're dealing with in our private life into our working life, even though I don't like the idea of splitting those two lives because it is your one life. But can you talk a little bit about how this has helped or played out in your personal life?
Yeah, I think in a really interesting way, it's how I've handled the personal pressure that has most served the professional pressure. So it was the other way around, which was really interesting. And I didn't realize it was going to be that way. Because to go from the professional, and I'll definitely go on to the personal, is that I talked about this dream job and the industry that I chose, but sometimes I used to really, you know, berate myself that I didn't have a thick skin. And I can remember saying that story quite a lot out loud, that, you know, I love television, probably the same as athletics of what I said, but possibly my makeup wasn't best placed to sit in the industry that I'd chosen. And actually, I learned to stop wishing that I was made up of other stuff, and that, yes, I have a sensitivity, and that has created and does create great compassion, great empathy. It allows me to get the best out of those I'm interviewing and those I'm coaching. So reframing that and thinking about my thickness of skin or perceived lack of it, I started to recognize the real well of inner strength I had through personal trauma. And I didn't realize I had that. I honestly, it surprised me when it came about, and I'm able to then use that in subsequent big performance professional pressures. But the trauma that my husband and I experienced is that we lost our baby boy Seb just moments after birth. Now that's obviously a heartbreaking experience that never goes, and you learn, and I've learned in my own particular way, and Terry, my husband, has in his own way, to, well, for me, it's been making my heart bigger, in all honesty, to be able to hone some of those cracks and aches. But it actually became a huge vehicle of strength. How I handled that trauma taught me so much about myself. Because in the aftermath of it, my husband and I decided that we wanted to have every test that we could have so that we could, well, really help our healing with losing Seb, but also help us with future pregnancies. And what we discovered was that I was a huge risk for future pregnancies. There was a big risk involved. But Terry and I really felt very true and real that we wanted to go again, and we wanted to try again. Now, the strength that I got from Seb and from that experience meant that what could have been an insurmountable amount of pressure in our next pregnancy, because there was such uncertainty. There was so much uncertainty. I'd had surgery on my womb. There was so much involved that there was obviously a worst case scenario that could have easily been our experience again. And I was mindful that I didn't want to go down that path, because even now, I don't know how I was individual, as Terry and I as a couple would have been able to experience that level of trauma again. But really, in all honesty, I didn't go to the worst case scenario. And I think that is because of how I reframed the whole experience. It didn't feel useful for me to blame or be a victim or have any of that less than energy. No one should ever lose a child. So the why me just wasn't helpful. We had decided that we wanted to have another child. So it was, what can I do to help myself here? And it was deep belief. It was deep trust, because that was all I had. And it was using my experience with Seb and the love that came with that, because it would have I'd easily been able to lose the trust in the whole world from that experience. But actually, I really had more. And I generally felt, and still do, that Seb is now our angel on our life path that is going to help bring us another child and a sibling for him. And he really did help, because what entailed was a similar situation, in that I was rushed back to King's College Hospital.
This is your second pregnancy?
So this is second pregnancy with our daughter, Minnie. And it's the same hospital which I lost Seb in. And her life was in absolute jeopardy. So I was rushed into the theatre, and last time I woke up from general anaesthetic to the worst news a mother could ever possibly hear. So the thought that I was also going to wake up, I just had to surrender. There was such a surrendering experience that I have borrowed from consequently. It's such an opposite to trying to hold on for dear life.
Gosh, yeah.
It was trying to create life by letting go.
Yeah.
And Minnie was, our daughter, was resuscitated. It was a trauma for her and for me and for Terry. But she was rushed to intensive care. And I was told that as soon as I had gone through a little bit more recovery, that I could go to see her. But she was an absolute warrior. And the doctors, the consultants, the midwives, the nurses, they were all saying, she was, her survival is an act of God. And I was, absolute belief that her angel, big brother Seb, was helping her. But the way I dealt with that situation just gave me so much strength. I just didn't know that I had access to that level of resource and reserve. And when I left King's Hospital, I was absolutely taking Seb and Minnie home. I'm 100% in belief about that. But even as I say it, the major difference from the experience that I was having professionally was that, when I tried to do too much, or the sense of overwhelm or overachieving or over-impressing, because in some instance, shape or form, I'd lost trust in myself and my ability. I'd lost trust in those around me who are also brilliant and are there supporting. And I'd lost trust in something that was bigger at play. And with a heartbreaking experience, which should easily have not been the case, I refound my trust with all of those things. So I didn't need to do so much. I could let go and all those things, those wonderful things that we're saying in performance, when you can relax and be present into it. I was able to dance and appreciate and connect, to make a choice of what I was connecting to. And Minnie now is 16 months, and she's curious and wonderful and cheeky and incredible, but she's an absolute miracle. She is a miracle. But that experience, how I handled what could have been crazy pressure in a subsequent pregnancy after loss, knowing that how my body was made could mean that there was a similar situation again, and there almost was, and knowing that her life was touch and go, and how I handled that has brought me back to how can I bring in trust, and how can I bring in a sense of letting go, so that I can be in this world and channel what's beyond a positive mindset, absolutely, but channel the great stuff that can then come in that sort of common impact for good, which I know is a wonderful coaching impact in, as Sara Milne was saying. But it really was a lived experience of that, and a very much a lived one, because there was a living baby that was
Gosh, Abi, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's so moving to hear the story, but also profoundly moving to hear how that trauma, almost second trauma, has actually opened you into being even more present to letting go. I think there's such power in that. What I particularly feel in this story is the importance of connecting all parts of our lives, actually, which is why I think the whole work-life balance thing is misquoted, because you can feed, every part of your life can feed you and help you understand how to, you know, be better in moments of pressure, which is what we're talking about now, but in so many rich ways. And I really thank you for that honesty, because I hope that there'll be many people listening who have got other pressures going on in their lives that will take great comfort from that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. So in the podcast, I ask the same question to each one of my guests, and that is, if you could pay forward, Abi, 2 things to anyone listening to this podcast who is on the journey of wanting to be better under pressure, what would you offer?
It is a great question, and just going from what we've spoken about and what you've picked up, I think it is looking at those moments of pressure in all your life. And so that start with that self-inquiry of when you've actually managed pressure well, so that you can borrow from it. And from our earlier conversation, how can you reframe that pressure to be positive? Because I mentioned, I'm sure I'm one of many that tends to have that negative bias towards what pressure can evoke in me personally. But
as a word as well, are you saying also about the fact that
a word, I think and from people that I've worked with, there's a tendency to think of pressure and the physical manifestations that we get of it, of sweaty palms, racy heartbeat, and whereas actually, some of what we've shared and what I'm sure is rich in everyone's life is how pressure has enabled them to do what they do, or to get to where they've got to, or to be who they are. So how can we unpick some of those memories and some of those stories, so that they can really connect to them and let that buoy their confidence in those moments of pressure that are coming up. So I think there is something about pausing and doing a little bit of self-exploration to go, oh my goodness, actually I've really handled different pressure points, whether that might be, a physical endurance challenge, however that looks in your own life, be able to borrow from that and unpick to see what you've done, because that story will absolutely define strengths, and it may come from places that you don't expect, as I mentioned, trauma, but suddenly I realized what I'm capable of from that moment, that I can absolutely unleash into the world for other great purposes. And then it is that discipline that you picked up on in the moments before a high pressure moment. How can you use that story to connect us to a bank of evidence that we can then bring in those affirmations and that self-talk, and you being your cheerleader for yourself. So what might be that practice and ritual for them So that is the second point. And once that becomes, self-curated, it can also be then the trigger for you performing better under pressure, rather than us in those pressurized moments hoping that we are going to perform well. Yes. Or leaving it to chance. Let that ritual set you up to win in whatever that equivalent moment for you is. But I've mentioned mine, but what could that be for you, so that you know that you have an anchoring in that moment, so that you can be present and you can add your voice and authority and ability and capability and all those wonderful things that make you you, and do it in an authentic way, but having something that equips you to manage that pressurized moment so that it does become a real force for extraordinary impact.
What a fabulous way to finish. Abi, thank you so much for so many profound and really honest shares. I really appreciate that so much.
Sarah, thank you so much. And my last little thing that I'd add is that I knew that this is the first time I've spoken in a public capacity on SEB. So that it gets me back, and I suppose it is completely informed by the work that I do, but it gets me to saying some of this stuff out loud for the first time before you're in the performance moment. I didn't know how those words would come out, so I needed to practice saying them to be able to be in service to our conversation, to others listening. So I think that is if I'm allowed a third point here, just is to rehearse some of this stuff. It helps make me feel proud, and hopefully it will make Seb feel proud hearing it, and
absolutely,
and Minnie feel that energy as well. So I think it's the power of pride in pressure is another really useful one to connect to. And now I can also cry.
Yes. Well, I mean, you did it beautifully, Abi, and I feel very honoured that it's the first time you've actually spoken it out loud like that. And I'm sure there will be people listening that it will resonate with in whatever way in their own lives. Thank you for doing that, and may you do it again.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, I've loved it. I was looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Me too, Abi, so much. Thank you. Sometimes I hear people say that they don't want to rehearse something for fear of it becoming too prepared and losing its sense of spontaneity and authenticity. And Abi said that she thought carefully about how to share this personal story so that she could deliver it in a way that would be useful for others and make her and others involved proud. Despite its emotional content, I'm sure you agree, at no point did it feel over-prepared or inauthentic. The concept of rehearsed spontaneity sounds counterintuitive, but can actually create freedom to be, as Abi says, present with pressure and bring the best of ourselves to it, be it personal or professional, rather than run the risk of having no idea how the words will come out when it actually matters most. Thank you, Abi. I'm grateful you chose to share with us something you'd thought so carefully about. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. Our aim is to share as many examples as possible of what people do to manage pressure for better. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.